The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor, and Vivienne Marchetti collapsed against my shoulder before I could say her name. 1 second she was chewing me out about a contract clause, the next her knees folded like paper and her forehead hit the wool of my jacket, cold as river stone. I caught her under the arms. Her pulse was there but wrong, too fast then too slow, like something inside her couldn't decide whether to keep going. I didn't wait for security. I didn't wait for the paramedics anyone might have called. I hauled my boss into my arms, took the freight elevator down, put her in the back of my car, and drove to St. Luke's with my hazards on and her lipstick smearing red against my white collar. They tried to peel her away from me at the ER. She wouldn't let go of my wrist. That's the part I keep coming back to. Her nails, French-tipped and sharp, buried in my skin like she was afraid I was the last real thing in the room. A nurse shoved a clipboard at me. Emergency contact next of kin, we need someone on the intake form. Vivienne, gray-lipped, blinking slow, took the pen out of my hand and wrote across the top of the page in her own trembling script, Elias Vaughn. My name, not her mother in Milan, not her sister on the board, not the fiancé the tabloids had photographed her with 2 weekends ago in Aspen. Me. The single dad in accounting who she'd hired 8 months back and hadn't spoken to socially once. They wheeled her away and I stood in that fluorescent hallway with my daughter's juice box straw still in my pocket and a clipboard shaking in my hands, and I understood. In a way I had no business understanding, that my life had just cracked down the middle. I'd been a widower for 4 years. Maya was 6. Her mother had died of an aneurysm on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in a meeting I didn't remember the point of. Since then I'd built a life the width of a hallway: work, school pickup, macaroni, bath, bedtime story, laundry, sleep. I dated exactly once, a woman from Maya's daycare, and I'd cut it off after 3 weeks because I couldn't picture anyone at the other end of my kitchen table. Vivienne Marchetti had walked into my picture the day she took over as CFO, all dark hair and dark suits and a voice that could cut glass. Everyone in the firm was afraid of her. I was too until the 3rd week when she stood behind my desk at 10 p.m. and read my forecast model over my shoulder and said quietly, "You're the only person in this building who isn't lying to me." Then she walked out, didn't say goodnight, didn't say thank you. I told myself I hadn't thought about her since. I had thought about her every night. The doctor came out after 2 hours. Overwork, dehydration, and untreated arrhythmia she'd been hiding from her cardiologist. She's stable. She's asking for you. He looked at the form, looked at me, looked at the wedding band tan line on my finger. Are you family, Mr. Vaughn? I'm her. I stopped. I work with her. He raised one eyebrow. She wrote your name. I know. They let me in. The room was too bright and too cold, and she looked like a photograph of herself, all the color drained out. There was an IV in her hand, and she was still wearing one earring, a diamond stud, the other lost somewhere between the boardroom and here. When she saw me, her mouth trembled, and she looked away like she was ashamed I'd seen it. You didn't have to come in, she said. You put me on the form. I panicked. You don't panic, she laughed. It cracked in the middle. That's true. So maybe I meant it. I sat down in the chair beside her bed, and I didn't take her hand because taking her hand felt like signing a contract I wasn't allowed to sign. She was engaged. Everyone knew she was engaged. Julian Wex, oil money, 32 years old, jaw like a magazine cover, a man who owned 3 racehorses and had once thrown a party on a glacier. I'd read about him because I read about her. I told myself it was market research. Where's your fiancé? I asked. In Zurich, she said. He'll fly back tomorrow or the day after. Depending on the market, that's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She turned her head on the pillow and looked at me. She had one of those faces where the eyes did all the work, dark, wet, half-lidded from the sedative. Her gaze went from my mouth to my collar to the smear of her own lipstick on my shirt, and then, slowly, back up to my eyes, and I felt the temperature in the room slide sideways. You carried me, she said. You would have hit the floor. You carried me all the way down. It wasn't far. Elias, she said my name like she was tasting it. It was 11 flights of stairs when the freight elevator jammed on the 12th. I remember. I hadn't realized she was awake for that part. I looked at my hands. There was a bruise blooming on my forearm where her hip had knocked against me on the last landing. I didn't remember it hurting. Get some sleep, I said, and I stood up. Elias, yeah, come back tomorrow. Vivienne, please, I said I would. I lied to myself about why. I picked Maya up from my sister's at 11. She was already asleep, cheek stuck to a couch cushion, one sock off. I carried her to the car and she made a small satisfied sound against my neck, and I thought, unwillingly, of another weight against my shoulder 6 hours earlier. And I gripped the steering wheel too hard on the drive home. At 2 in the morning I was still awake, staring at the ceiling when my phone lit up. Unknown number, you washed your shirt yet? I stared at it. I typed back, how did you get this number? HR file. I'm the CFO, I have all your numbers. Vivienne, it's 2 a.m. The nurse won't let me sleep. She keeps checking my pulse. It goes up every time I think about you standing in that hallway holding my clipboard. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. I put a pillow over it. 2 minutes later, I picked it up again. You're engaged? I know, you should text Julian. Julian is asleep in a hotel in Zurich and would not care if my pulse went up. Vivienne, Elias, go to sleep. Come to the hospital tomorrow morning. Before work, I want to see you before I have to be anyone's boss again. I didn't answer. I fell asleep with the phone against my chest and I dreamed about 11 flights of stairs. She was sitting up when I walked in the next morning, hair down for the first time I'd ever seen, wearing a hospital gown and a cashmere robe someone had brought her. She looked at me over the rim of a paper cup of coffee, and something in her face went very still. You came, I said I would. You're wearing the same tie. I have 3 ties, buy more ties. I laughed, it surprised me. She smiled behind her coffee cup, and I hated how much I wanted to memorize the shape of it. There was a chair beside her bed and I sat in it, and I did not look at the strip of collarbone exposed above the robe, and she saw me not looking and her smile deepened. Tell me about your daughter, she said. Maya, she's 6. I know her name. I asked HR. You're not supposed to ask HR that. Tell me about her anyway. I told her about Maya. About the missing tooth and the imaginary horse named Bertrand, and how she'd been sleeping in my bed for 8 months because a shadow on her wall had looked like a witch. I told her more than I told anyone. Vivienne listened the way she read a spreadsheet with her whole attention, no room for anything else in the room. When I stopped talking, she said, You're lonely, I'm busy, that's not the same. I know. She reached across the sheets and she took my hand, just the fingers, just the tips. And every nerve in my arm lit up like a switchboard. Julian is flying in tonight, she said. Okay, I'm going to end it. I looked at her, she looked back. Her thumb moved once very slowly across the back of my knuckles. Because of yesterday, I said, because of a year of yesterdays. Yesterday was just the last one. Vivienne, don't tell me not to. I wasn't going to. Good, she let go of my hand. I got up because if I stayed one more second, I was going to do something a man with a 6-year-old daughter and a mortgage did not get to do. At the door she said, Elias. I turned. Thank you for the 11 flights, anytime. Don't say that unless you mean it. I went to work. I could not concentrate. Every time the elevator dinged, I looked up expecting her, and every time it wasn't her, I felt something sag inside me and then flare up again on the next ding. At 3 p.m. a delivery came to my desk, a tie, slate blue silk, the kind of tie a man wore to a wedding he was in, no note. I put it on in the men's room and I threw the old one in the trash and I sat back down at my desk and I stared at the numbers on my screen until they meant nothing. She was discharged Thursday. She didn't come back to the office. I heard through the assistants that Julian's plane had landed. I heard through the assistants that Julian had left the penthouse at midnight in a suit and no tie and had not been back. I told myself I didn't care what I heard through the assistants. I refreshed my phone every 11 minutes. She texted me Friday at 9 p.m. Come over, just the address. A building on the park, one of those pre-war fortresses where a doorman knows your name because he's been told in advance to know it. Maya was at my sister's for the weekend. I was in sweatpants. I changed 3 times. I ended up in the slate blue tie and a dress shirt with the collar open, and I told myself I was going over to be a colleague, and I got out of the car and I walked past the doorman and I got in the elevator and my hands were shaking. She opened the door in bare feet, jeans, a white t-shirt that had probably cost more than my rent. Hair wet from a shower, no makeup, and I had never in my life seen anything as intentional as Vivienne Marchetti in a plain t-shirt. "Come in." The apartment was huge and dim and smelled like something green and expensive. There was a fire going in a fireplace that had no business existing in a Manhattan apartment. She poured me a whiskey without asking what I wanted, and she poured herself one, and she sat on the couch and folded her legs under her and looked at me across the coffee table. "I ended it," she said. "Yesterday, in the car from the airport." "How did he take it?" "He said I'd regret it." "Will you?" "Not today." I sat down, not on the couch, in the chair across from her. She noticed. She smiled a little. "You're keeping distance." "I'm trying." "Why?" "Because you were in a hospital bed 48 hours ago and you just ended an engagement, and I have a daughter who's already lost one person." "That's 3 reasons." "I have more." "Tell me." "You're my boss. I'm the CFO. You report to the controller. You sign my checks. HR signs your checks." "Vivienne, Elias." We stared at each other across a coffee table that was suddenly the width of a country. The fire cracked. Somewhere below us a horn honked. She uncurled her legs and stood up and walked around the table, slow, deliberate. And she stopped in front of my chair and she put her hands on the armrests and she leaned down until her hair fell around my face like a curtain, and I could smell the shampoo and the whiskey and the faint remainder of hospital antiseptic she hadn't quite scrubbed off. "I have been thinking about you," she said, "since the 3rd week. Don't, for 8 months. Vivienne, you said my name 3 times. That's a lot for you." I closed my eyes. I could feel her breath on my mouth. I could feel every inch of the distance between us like a wire humming. "If you kiss me now," I said, "I'm not going to be able to stop. I know, I have a daughter. I know, you could ruin me. I know that too." She kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was the kiss of a woman who had made a decision 3 days ago in a hospital bed and had spent every hour since practicing. Her hand went to my jaw, my throat, the collar of my shirt. And my hands went to her waist without asking my permission, and I stood up out of the chair with her still against my mouth, and I walked her backward until her back hit the bookshelf and a book fell. Often neither of us looked at it. She tasted like whiskey and something warmer. She made a small sound against my mouth that I was going to remember for the rest of my life. I pulled back. I made myself pull back. My forehead was against hers and we were both breathing like we'd run up 11 flights of stairs. "Not tonight," I said. "Elias, not because I don't want to. Because I want it too much." "That's not a reason. It's the only one I have." She laughed, wet and low. Her hand was still curled in the collar of my shirt. "You're going to be a problem," she said. "I know. Go home." Yeah, I did not go home. I sat in my car in the parking garage of her building for 40 minutes with the engine off, staring at the concrete wall, feeling the shape of her mouth on mine like a burn. Then I drove home and I did not sleep, and at 4 a.m. I texted her one word: "Monday." She wrote back in 11 seconds. "Monday." Monday she came to the office in a red dress. Red. Vivienne Marchetti did not wear red. She wore black and charcoal, and once, on a Christmas party, navy. She wore red on Monday, and every man in the building looked at her twice, and every woman looked at her once, sharp. And I looked at her exactly the amount I was supposed to look at my boss, and no more. And she walked past my desk without saying my name and dropped a folder on it that had a post-it on the front in her handwriting. "Your office, 7 p.m. Bring the tie." I brought the tie. Her office had frosted glass on 3 walls and a door that locked from the inside. She was standing at the window when I came in, back to me, city lights blooming behind her. "Close the door," she said, without turning around. I closed the door. "Lock it." I locked it. She turned. She had taken her heels off. She was smaller without them. She walked over to me barefoot on the carpet, and she took the end of the slate blue tie in her fingers and she used it to pull me down to her mouth, slow, like she was seeing if I'd let her. And I let her. God, I let her. We didn't sleep together that night either. We stood in her locked office and we kissed and we talked and we kissed, and she told me about her father who had died when she was 11, and I told her about Alina, my wife. The way I never told anyone about Alina, and Vivienne cried once briefly, silently, and then wiped her face with the back of her hand and said, "This is going to get us both fired. Probably. I don't care. You should care, do you? I have a mortgage. I'll buy your mortgage." Vivienne, I'm joking. I'm not joking, I don't know. We laughed, then we didn't. She rested her forehead against my chest and she breathed in, and I felt something in me, some old, brittle, 4-year-old thing, crack open. "I have to tell you something," she said into my shirt. "Okay, Julian didn't take it well," you said. "I mean, he didn't take it well. He knows about you. He saw us on the hospital security footage. His father sits on our board." I went still. She felt it. She looked up at me. "How much does he know?" "He knows your name. He knows you're a widower. He knows about Maya." "How does he know about Maya?" "Elias," her voice was very quiet. "He had you looked into before I even ended it. He had a photograph of you and Maya at the playground." My hands closed on her arms harder than I meant to. "When? Sunday? He's had someone following me since Sunday." "Yes, Vivienne, I know. He can't. He can. He is. I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know if he's going to go to the board or go to the tabloids or go to your ex-mother-in-law. I don't know, Elias, I don't know." I let her go. I walked to the window. The city was very bright and very indifferent. I thought about Maya. I thought about the school pickup line and the other parents with their coffee cups and their whispers. I thought about the photograph of my daughter in some rich man's manila envelope. "I have to think," I said. "I know. I have to go home and think." "I know." I turned around. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, the red dress and the bare feet and the smudged mascara from a kiss. "I'm not walking away," I said. "I want you to hear that. I'm not walking away. I have to think." "Okay, don't text me tonight." "Okay, I'll text you tomorrow." "Okay." I left. She stood in the middle of her locked office and watched me leave through the frosted glass, a red shape blurred at the edges, and I have thought about that shape 1,000 times since. I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of Maya's bed and I watched her breathe. She had one arm flung over her horse, Bertrand, who was in fact a stuffed rabbit. Her hair was a tangle. She was the whole of my life, and she did not know that a man with a jet was angry at her father tonight. At 6 a.m. I made a decision I hated. I texted Vivienne, "I need 2 weeks to think. To make sure Maya's okay, to figure out what Julian is going to do. I need you to not contact me for 2 weeks. Not because I don't want to, because I need to know if I can do this with my head on." She wrote back immediately, "2 weeks, Vivienne." I said, "Okay. Go take care of your daughter. Thank you, Elias. Yeah, if you come back in 2 weeks, I am not going to let you leave again." I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and I made Maya pancakes, and I did not cry until she was on the school bus. Julian went to the tabloids on day 4. It wasn't the front page. It was worse than the front page. It was a business gossip column that everyone in our industry read with their morning coffee. CFO Vivienne Marchetti breaks engagement with heir Julian Wex, seen leaving hospital with a subordinate. Sources say the affair predates the split. There was a grainy still from the hospital security cam, my hand on her wrist, her looking up at me. It looked exactly like what it wasn't and exactly like what it was. The board called an emergency meeting on day 5. I was not invited. I heard about it from my controller, who couldn't look me in the eye. On day 6, HR called me into a room with a woman I'd never met before and a lawyer I'd seen once at a Christmas party. And they asked me questions in the careful voices of people who had already decided what they thought. I told the truth. I told them Vivienne had collapsed. I told them I had driven her to the hospital. I told them she had put my name on the form. I told them we had not been involved before that day. I did not tell them about the kiss in her apartment or the kiss in her locked office. Nobody asked. They took notes. They said thank you. They said they'd be in touch. On day 7, my sister called me. My mother-in-law had called her. Alina's mother, who had a photograph of Vivienne on her kitchen table now, printed from the internet, and a lot of things to say about the kind of woman a widower brought around his daughter. My sister told me my mother-in-law was talking about lawyers, about custody, about unfitness. I sat on the kitchen floor with the phone against my ear, and I did not say anything for a long time, and my sister said gently, "Elias, is she worth it?" I did not answer. I did not know. I did not know. Day 9, Maya got sent home from school with a stomachache that wasn't a stomachache. She'd overheard something in the pickup line. She sat on my lap on the couch and she asked me if the lady in the newspaper was going to be her new mom. She asked in the voice of a child who had already thought about it. I put my face in her hair and I said I didn't know, sweetheart, I didn't know, and she said quietly, I liked her hair. In the picture. Day 11, I broke. I drove to Vivienne's building at 9 p.m. The doorman looked at me. He said, she's not receiving, Mr. Vaughn, tell her I'm here. She said no exceptions. Tell her the exception is me. He picked up the phone. He said something I couldn't hear. He listened. He put the phone down. He said, 42nd floor. She opened the door and she looked like a woman who had also not slept for 11 days. No makeup, hair up in a knot, an oversized cardigan. The apartment behind her was dark except for a single lamp. You said 2 weeks, she said. I know. It's day 11. I know. I have been sitting in this apartment for 11 days, Elias. I have been reading about myself. I have been reading about you. I have been reading about your daughter. I know. They took my name off 2 boards. I know. Julian sent his lawyer over on Tuesday. He wants back a piece of jewelry that belonged to his grandmother that I never wore. Vivienne, come in. I came in. She closed the door. She turned around and she looked at me and she was crying without making any noise, the way she had cried in her office. And I put my arms around her and she put her forehead into my chest and I held her while the lamp made a small warm circle around us and the city, indifferent, hummed. I can't do this halfway, I said. If we do this, we do this. You and Maya's life, me at your mother's dinner table, all of it. I don't have anything smaller in me. I used up all the smaller versions. Okay, my mother-in-law is talking about custody. I know, my lawyer already called yours. He'll handle it. You called my lawyer. I called you a lawyer on day 7. You didn't have one. I stared at her. She wiped her face. I told you, she said. If you came back, I was not going to let you leave again. You didn't wait for me to come back. You started fighting on day 7. Yes, for me and my daughter. Yes, Vivienne, Elias. I kissed her, not the way I'd kissed her in her apartment. Not the way I'd kissed her in her office. I kissed her like a man who had chosen. She made that sound again, the small one, the one I was going to remember. And her arms went around my neck and my hands were in her hair and the cardigan slipped off one shoulder and the strap of something silk underneath caught the lamplight and I picked her up and she wrapped her legs around my waist and she said, against my mouth, bedroom. I carried her. 11 steps this time, not 11 flights. I stopped in the doorway. I stopped because I had to be sure. She looked at me from 3 inches away and her eyes were dark and wet and certain and she said, Elias, come inside. I did. We didn't sleep. We talked. We laughed. She wore my shirt at 3 a.m. and made toast in her enormous kitchen and I sat on the counter and watched her and I thought about how a life could break in the middle and then, months or years later, quietly in a kitchen, in a shirt, begin to make itself again. At 5 a.m. she said, I want to meet her. Maya, yes, not yet. When I'm sure the news cycle has moved on, when I'm sure Julian is done, when I've talked to my mother-in-law. When Maya asks, that's a lot of whens. I know. I can wait. Can you? Yes, I believed her. The custody thing didn't happen. My mother-in-law came to my apartment on a Saturday and sat across from me at the kitchen table and cried and told me that Alina would have wanted me to have a life and that she was scared and that she was sorry. I told her I understood. I told her I was scared too. I asked her when she was ready to meet Vivienne. She said when she was ready, she would. The board thing did happen. I got a package. My last paycheck was inside it, plus a severance I hadn't asked for. Vivienne resigned the following Monday. She didn't tell me she was going to. She walked into a boardroom and she resigned and she walked out and she called me from her car and she said, I have some money, enough that we can be picky. What do you want to do? I want to pick Maya up from school. Okay. I want to take her to the aquarium. Okay. I want you to meet us there by the jellyfish tank. At 4, there was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. Are you sure? She said. She asked about you again this morning. She asked when the lady with the hair was coming over. Elias, 4 p.m. jellyfish tank. She was there at 3:40. She was wearing jeans and a coat and no makeup, and her hair was down, and she looked, for a woman who had just walked out of her own career, unafraid. Maya saw her first. Maya, who I had told very little, who had absorbed everything anyway, walked up to her and looked up at her and said, "You're the lady from the picture." Vivienne crouched down. Kept a careful, respectful distance. "I am. My dad said you have nice hair. Your dad has been giving me too much credit," Maya laughed. Maya laughed the way she laughed when a stranger said something clever, and my heart, which had been broken for 4 years and then, in the last month, broken again in an entirely different way, moved in my chest. They looked at jellyfish together. Vivienne answered every question seriously, as if the questions had been asked at a board meeting. Maya asked if she was going to be her new mom. Vivienne looked over her head at me, and I nodded once, and she looked down at Maya and she said, "Not right away. Right now I'd like to be your friend." "Is that okay?" Maya considered this the way she considered everything, with her whole face. "Okay," she said. "But you have to like Bertrand." "Who is Bertrand?" "My horse. I love horses. He's a rabbit." "I love rabbits too." Maya took her hand. She just took her hand. Vivienne looked at me across the top of my daughter's head, and there was a whole conversation in her face that I did not have any words for, and I didn't need any, because Maya's small hand had settled the argument. We lost things. We lost a lot of things. I lost my job. She lost hers. She lost 2 board seats and a family friend and a wedding at the plaza. I lost the good graces of a mother-in-law I loved for a while, until she and I found our way back to each other. We lost the version of ourselves that fit inside other people's expectations. We lost the story other people had been telling about us. We got other things. We got a house in Brooklyn with a small yard where Maya learned to ride a real bike. We got Sunday mornings with the paper. We got Vivienne's laugh, which turned out to be a real laugh, loud and startled, once you got underneath the boss voice. We got a wedding, eventually small, in a garden with my sister and Maya and Alina's mother in the front row. We got a life. It wasn't small, it wasn't safe, it was ours. Sometimes at night, when Vivienne is asleep beside me and Maya is asleep down the hall and Bertrand, the rabbit, is stationed on the landing like a sentry, I think about that elevator, about her weight against my shoulder, about the clipboard in the ER, about her hand shaking as she wrote my name across the top of a form when the only correct answer was a woman in Milan or a man in Zurich. She chose me before she knew she was choosing me. And I chose her before I let myself say the word. Here is what I have come to believe: love does not always arrive on schedule. Sometimes it arrives in a freight elevator on a Wednesday afternoon, and it collapses against you, and it puts your name on a form, and it costs you your job and your reputation and the version of yourself that was easy for other people to explain. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave and very willing to lose things, it is worth all of it. Would you have taken her home from the hospital? Would you have driven back the second time? Would you have knocked on the door on day 11, or waited out the 2 weeks and never known what happened on the other side? If this story stayed with you, tap that like button. Tell me in the comments who you'd choose, the safe love or the one that costs you everything, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I read every comment. I'll see you in the next story.